Hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. Thank you for joining us. It is episode 128 and we are delighted to be joined by Priya Lakhani OBE. Priya is a barrister and the founder of Century Tech.
Priya was awarded Business Entrepreneur of the Year in 2009 and an OBE in 2014. She's also the author of the new book, Inadequate: The System Failing Our Teachers and Your Children.
Yeah, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on your podcast channel, please hit subscribe to check out our back catalogue. We think there's about 180 total. We've had different forms of the podcast, about 180 episodes in total. Please leave us a review, and you can also watch those episodes if you want to, youtube.com/edufuturists.
So, yeah, without any further delay, let's bring on Priya. Priya, how are you doing? You all right?
I'm well. How are you?
Very well. We're looking forward to interviewing you and having this chat. We've all been reading Inadequate, your new book.
What do you think?
It's brilliant. I think we were just saying, weren't we, before we went live, that we're with you pretty much on every page of this. We're with you in terms of the benefits of AI and future skills and just kind of how... I'm just flicking through here and I've just come across a title that says The Revolution, and I think that kind of it sums up a lot of our thoughts, because we have this discussion quite a bit that our education system we tend to think that it's going to evolve and however, what if it hasn't, and what if we actually now need a revolution? So it'd be great to get into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think now is a really interesting time, because what's happened with this really devastating pandemic, this crisis, is that everything's been turned, upside down. We haven't had exams. We didn't have exams last year. We haven't got them this year. I think the news came out, just now, that teachers are now going to be looking at, offering those GCSE grades to students. And so, it is really uncertain. It's not, schools are obviously, challenged with mass testing, GCSE grades and all of that. But this turning of the upside down, turning the system upside down, has left us with an opportunity of, do we then go back to the way that things were, or do we take this as the opportunity and say, right, what can we do different? Because we know, many people know, that the current system just isn't fit for purpose.
Yeah, totally with you. And I think it's worth straight away going into about the book. We love the book. I know you asked us what we thought of it. We love it. And I've been recommending it elsewhere. So you said before you came on, you think we might be 3 of the 4 sales and the 4th one being your mum.
My mum, yes. Although my dad read it. Yes, my mum's still getting through it. What does this mean? But she's great. I mean, my parents definitely agree with me on every single point, of course. But it's really nice to hear that my other 3 readers also like the book. So that's always really positive.
What I really love about it, and because it's obviously provocative, the title's provocative, and so should it be, because this is a really important topic that we're talking about. But the subtitle is what really gets me, is about the system that's failing our teachers and your children. And I think why did you decide to write the book, and then why do you think it's failing our children and teachers?
Yeah, so well, firstly, on the title, it was actually called Requires Improvement the entire time that it was being written. And it was just at the end of it, this entire process of writing everything down, which was a really cathartic experience, because it was taking all of the, questions that, that I had asked, those answers that teachers, head teachers, college educators and teachers had answered, and putting it all down. It's a vast amount of knowledge from the sector, actually. And so, I think some people said, well, you're not a teacher. I said, well, look, I did teach for a couple of years, but actually this has come from the sector. So it was really cathartic, but it was called Requires Improvement. At the end, I read it, looking at the sort of the final draft, I thought this cannot be called Requires Improvement. It has to be called Inadequate. Obviously, it's a play on Ofsted, but it is so poor. Some of the issues are just so, it's so broken, and there's so much that we need to do. So that's where the title came from. In terms of why I wrote it, I'm just always honest in these conversations. Look, I wish I could tell you that I sat down and said, I must write this and this must all be written and heard. Actually, it was a requested coffee from a publisher, and they said, Priya, will you have coffee with me? And I said, sure. Had coffee with him, and Alex Sharratt from John Catt just sat down and said, can you write a book? And I said yes, and that's basically what happened. So he came, he met me, he said, look, I think you've got a lot to say from all the people that you work with in the sector, and I agreed. And I didn't realise at the time how difficult it would be. It was a really big project, and obviously really busy at Century, so got a full-time job there, children at home, etc. So I thought it would be quite easy to do, and then I realised that I've embarked on something that's really, really challenging. But you know, the end result actually, as I said, has been really cathartic, because I've managed to take everything that I've learned about the sector from teachers and head teachers, the many thousands that we work with, and put down all of their concerns into 156 pages. And it's short for a reason, because I just don't think it needs to be any longer, you know. And again, it's also not about solutions, as you'll know. It's about, here are all the issues. Let's take a little bit of a look at the history. Let's look at some of the opportunity, but it has to be a much bigger conversation with the actual practitioners on the front line, parents, students, policymakers. Everybody needs to now get together and rethink what this system should look like.
It's interesting there when you talk about all the different the different stakeholders in education, especially in the UK, and it seems like we're all at very different stages. So the teaching profession is and where we speak as teachers really is becoming more and more traditional as the days go on. We see the government in its own place. We see businesses, and one of my role is in careers education. So I kind of see businesses, especially in where I am in the northeast of England, crying out for certain skills and seeing that they're not there in the people and the students that are coming out of education. And if we're all at different stages, if all these stakeholders are all kind of expecting education to be something slightly different, is this movement, however you want to describe it, is it stuck? Do you see it moving in the near future?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I actually don't think people are at cross purposes about what it needs to be. I think that we have done enough work and asked employers what they want from, you know, their graduates, from their apprentices, from people who, you know, go to work, right? We've looked at automation, and, you know, I mean, McKinsey did this report where it said, look, you know, AI automation is going to destroy 800 million jobs by 2030, which is not very far away, but 890 million new jobs will be created by 2030. The issue is that those jobs require different sorts of skills. So we've got work, and, you know, we've done lots of research on that. Universities, we know how they work. You know, we can consult with them to see, well, what do they need to see in terms of applications. And head teachers and teachers have been talking for a long time, and often you hear the voices of, you know, Jeff Barson, who I think is absolutely amazing, and ASCL's, you know, schools are lucky to have him as the head of ASCL, but talking about what schools need in terms of change. And if you look at what everyone's saying, and a lot of that I think I've tried to summarize in areas of the book, they're not mutually exclusive. They're actually pretty complementary. But education being, you know, the vast big system that it is, and obviously if you look at the state system, you know, it requires policy to change things. And it can be a really scary world for people to think, well, if we change it, you know, we sort of want to first see the evidence that everything works for everybody before we change it. And I understand that mentality. The problem is that it's not working for everyone right now. And so, you know, you've got to, and I talk about this at the end of the book, where I sort of talk about, you know, that you don't want that inertia, because that's actually worse than trying something new and the potential for some failure. And so I think that all of these stakeholders, actually, it's not the most difficult task in the world, really, given what we've seen that as a country we are capable of during a pandemic when it comes to technology, science and innovation. Getting them together and saying, right, what would this look like? Sort of doing a big design thinking piece on what do we think this education system could look like, and just being open to it. You know, just because that piece of work is being done, it doesn't mean there's guaranteed change, but it's that openness. And but, you know, a lot of things get in the way. People have politics get in the way. Some people are just very comfortable with what they're doing. I remember, one head teacher said, "Why do you want to rock the boat? And why do you want to change anything? It's fine." And I thought, well, yes, it's fine for you. You're running an independent school in a very leafy part of, off the M25, and it's fine for you. But that's not the same situation for the hundreds of state schools that actually I'm dealing with every day. And so I think it's about being open to that conversation and not closing it off. And that would be a first really great step.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think that level of openness and being willing to accept that it isn't exactly where we want it to be, and that's okay, because we can learn from that. And as long as we're willing to learn and grow, I think we accept that. We expect that of our children, don't we, in schools, that to have a growth mindset. Or maybe we need to have a growth mindset in the education system. And I wonder if you feel that in the current situation that we're in, whether there's been like it's got worse, it's exacerbated by the current problem that we have in education through COVID and the lockdown and pandemic stuff.
So what's really interesting about the current the system that we're in and the pandemic is the pandemic has shone a light on the big problems. There are some urgent problems that we know that we need to solve. So we saw the problems with infrastructure, the problems with the fact that children don't often have bandwidth in certain parts of the country. They don't have devices. If we were to actually even use, forget like, the previous system and using EdTech and blended learning or flipped learning or any of those sorts of models. There are some children in the country that wouldn't have access to it anyway, which is a huge issue. And then we looked at, actually, one of the biggest issues in the system is how we treat our teachers and our expectations of them. And I think that's one of the fundamental issues that has to be solved. We have a moment in time where every parent of every child in the country totally understands and gets how difficult it is to be a teacher. They have had to manage 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, 5, whatever, kids at home. Right, homeschooling. Now they're sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, how do you manage 30? Right, this is really hard. And prior to the pandemic, society has often thought of teachers as, they leave at 3:30, they get long summer holidays. That's why you become a teacher. It's all about work-life balance. And obviously every educator, whether they're at school, at college, universities, they'll tell you that's just not what it's like. And so the pandemic's also shone a light on teaching, what we expect of them. I talk in the book about, the sort of call them martyrs. And I find that sometimes when I speak to teachers, I've got my head in my hands and I just think, oh my goodness, that they will never stop trying to do the best for their students, but we also have to focus on their well-being. So we've got this opportunity at the moment where everybody's listening. They are, they were clapping for the NHS every Thursday, and they really respect and understand how difficult it must be to be a teacher. And so there is an opportunity again here to now try and sort of, use that as a lever and say, right, how can we change the mindset? But the old system, just wasn't good enough. And so how we treat our teachers needs to be looked at. Mental health and wellbeing is an interesting one because pre-COVID, there are lots of people talking about it. COVID has clearly exacerbated the problem. Right. And there are some children actually where potentially there were no issues, where by being in lockdown and being at home, there are now bigger issues. Again, we are now looking at the pandemic and the crisis, but we need to move away. When we move forwards, we need to think, OK, now what do we need to do to invest in this? Are we really, honestly, going to go to our 30,000 schools and 500,000 teachers and saying you're going to have to deal with this when schools open up on the 8th of March and going forwards? Because that's not right. What we have to now do is say, OK, who is actually well equipped and skilled to deal with these sorts of issues in terms of mental health and well-being, and provide schools with the correct resources to support our teachers, because our teachers really do provide that village, right? They provide not just, the teaching and learning and transferring of knowledge and building of skills, but they provide so much more. The sort of pseudo parents, counsellors, they're doing a lot more. So in terms of the pre-system, I think, pre-COVID, I think that this has shone a light on so many issues. So many things have been exacerbated, but then there have been some positive aspects of it. And the positive aspects really are where technology comes in. I think that, what we've seen in terms of the data now is how many teachers have said that they have been actually quite excited about the potential of using technology. 8 in 10 teachers said that combining technology use with traditional resources and teaching methods will now persist for the coming years. And we know from, for example, at Century, the company that I founded, how much you can actually save teacher time by using AI technology, for example, and that's now being seen. There are so many schools and colleges and universities that didn't use this technology before the pandemic and probably wouldn't have done, but because they were thrown into the crisis, they had to all, become remote. They started using it, and they're really seeing how it can have an impact. So again, I think the problems that I just talked about are bigger, and they're far more fundamental, and we mustn't forget about them and then suddenly just dump it all on our teachers, frankly, to have to deal with all of this afterwards. But at the same time, we should look at some of the positives and think, again, I'd rather do that design thinking sort of piece of work and think, where can we take the positives? Where can we learn from all of the issues and design a better system?
I think there's a worry there, isn't there, that and we've expressed this a few times, that we don't want to get back to, in a few months' time, just everything going back to normal. And I think there's a prevailing attitude of let's get back to normal. That's kind of the bar at the minute.
Yeah,
normality.
Exactly. And I'll tell you where that's going to happen. So where you've got schools and colleges that have used legacy, traditional kind of input-output technology, and they haven't adopted any sort of innovation, they've gone straight from pre-COVID, face-to-face, to WebEx technology, face-to-face, but on digital, right? Where they've just used question answer, Google polls, or, where they've had to, and this is not necessarily their fault, but send PDFs of homework sheets to parents and email them saying, print them out and get your child to sit down and do this. That part of the sector that hasn't either embraced because of lack of understanding of, or the will, even, I think we've got to go there. Or I think mostly they haven't had the infrastructure. They've not got the the kids don't have the bandwidth. They haven't got the technology. There are so many students that are still without devices, and it's shocking. Those institutions are looking at that normality. You're absolutely right. But you then have the schools where they've had the technology, they've got the bandwidth, they've managed to get the laptops in, or they've had them before. They are using AI. They're seeing, oh, look, here are all of the improvements. Here's actually how we can increase a grade at GCSE or whatever, or depth of learning, and all that impact that they're seeing. They will then persist with using technology. So then what happens is you have that huge problem of the digital divide. You've got the issue where, we've always been talking, obviously, about increasing social mobility. The government's constantly talking about leveling up, but how can you do that when you then have, essentially increased the gap between those that use smart technology and those that didn't? And that's going to be then something that we're going to have to solve over the next decade, but many would argue that's going to be too late. So this is, when you look at some of the technologies that some are using, it's like, okay, you're giving a poor man's technology, but you've got the independent schools and some very well-run, innovative state schools, but they're in urban areas, they've got the bandwidth, they're using this other technology, and that's where the divide exists. And that's a really difficult predicament. You're not going to take, the innovation away from those institutions that are using it, but somehow you've got to try and level the playing field for those that aren't. And that, I don't know how we're going to escape that over the next few months, but that is certainly going to be something that's going to concern all parents, all educators. It's concerning me as a technology entrepreneur, and I know that it'll be something that government will have to grapple with in the near future as well.
Yeah, I think it really links into the definition in some of the guidance that's been given out of what education actually is about. Maybe is a bit stark, and actually, if we talk about the endpoint assessment all the time, and learning only happens to reach that goal or that finite element, that of course it's not going to be personalised if everybody's sitting in the same space. So we maybe need to shake up. Do you think that leads into it? Do you think the exam system and all of that issue is leading to the way that some people are thinking online or face-to-face instruction is the way to go?
I mean, exams are, interesting, endpoint assessment, all of these sorts of more high stakes tests and assessments in the way in which we do things. I think, I mean, I think what schools and further education colleges have been doing, I mean, I think further education students have actually been hit the hardest, and they're often the most vulnerable in terms of not having a solid pathway through education. But, how they look at exams and then how those institutions then sort of use technology it's mostly going to be, there's a bigger issue about high stakes assessment and exams than in a sense the technology that people have been using. It's more, I mean, I would always question, why do we have them in the first place, right? Because what people are actually doing is that they know what they're accountable for, they know what the metrics are that they're being examined by, even as an institution, let alone the actual student individually, and then everything is geared towards that one metric. And that's really, really difficult, because we treasure what we measure, and we essentially drive all of our performance towards those particular measures. And when we talk about exams, I mean, they're a pretty narrow set of metrics. What's interesting about the institutions, whether you're in FE, whether you're at school, is that teachers actually often try and provide that wider whole skill set, because they understand and they know that students are going to end up in the real world, where it's not just about remembering something, or it's not just about how good their RAM is, which obviously a computer will be able to beat them at. So they're doing it in spite of the system. So I think that there is a really big question about exams and tests, how we are essentially measuring our students. What are we actually equipping them for? One important point, I mean, I don't know if the three of you came across this, but when exams were cancelled last year and we had that whole algorithm debacle with the Department for Education, did you remember, and did you also see, like I did, how many students said, oh my gosh, I've not got exams? They started stressing and panicking. And then they said, well, then what's the point of education? They actually think education is about passing the exam. And that is so sad. And I thought, no, education is not about passing exams. It's become the tail that wags the dog, right? Assessment is supposed to be part and parcel of learning. But it's ended up being sort of the significant, piece, the bit that overwhelms and just sort of distorts everything. So, the answer about assessment is not an easy one, and exams is not an easy one. But I just think all of that needs a rethink, because that is actually what drives most of the problems in education. So hence I always advocate we should scrap them.
I agree. And it won't be a surprise to listeners of the podcast that this is kind of the drum that we bang repeatedly about exams being not fit for purpose, despite people telling us that the fairest way and the best way. And what we'll do, the announcement even today about confirmation, it's going to be teacher assessed grades, definitely what it's going to look like, and all the things that go with that. There is some kind of innate lack of wanting to trust teachers. And I think one of the things that I really liked that you talk about in the book, and I know we'll get into what you think the system could look like, but one of the things that really stuck with me, and it's something that when we interviewed Jim Knight, former education minister, a few months ago, he talked about, was about trusting teachers with freedom to do what they actually joined the profession to do. And I think this is the tough thing now, is that teachers don't feel trusted. They're not treated as professionals, and I can understand why you would say that this system is failing our teachers. Yeah,
so it's really difficult, because when we think about what you leave school with, right? When we look at a student and what all of us left school with, when you leave school with an asset of these, these levels or these grades, it is an asset. You use that to get further in life, right? So I always try and liken it a little bit like to a currency. It's worth something, so your level 9s are worth more than your level 7s and your level 4s, right? So they leave school with that currency and that asset. And the difficulty is that because everybody's so geared towards thinking, well, these 9 levels or whatever it is, or even in colleges, whatever you leave with, that's now going to be your currency. People get very nervous because they think about the teachers obviously inflating grades, right? Because they're going to not only just see the best in their students, which is actually, in itself actually is a lovely thing, but There's also potentially pressure from parents, right? You've got other parts of the sector where parents are paying for their education, so they feel more as customers of education rather. I mean, you know, every parent should really feel like a customer of education, but particularly in independent schools. So you can start to see why people worry about this new, you know, teachers basically providing grades. But the problem is that we've ended up in this situation because there's been a real sort of narrow sort of sense of thinking about what credentials could actually be. I mean, they should never really be 9 levels in the first place, or, you know, a couple of sort of reset levels at college plus your vocational skills. Students, when they go through this educational journey, they pick up so many skills, and, you know, skills and knowledge evolve, right? And so some people also, you know, slightly late starters, some do really well at the early side of school and college, and that's all fine. Technology that is advanced, where, you know, we're using this technology on our mobile phones for, frankly, you know, not the most important things in life. That same technology can be used to give students this sort of evolving passport of credentials and skills. So you're never really stuck with one grade. And if you use formative assessment, so constant sort of short, you know, tests that also give you feedback, so they're not catching you out like a speed camera on the road. They are actually, you know, short tests throughout the years of school and college and university, and as you and lifelong learning. Really important that this doesn't end at 16 or 18. This is about lifelong learning, so you can upskill yourselves. That passport of credentials being constantly updated, giving it a more holistic picture of the student. You know, and using formative assessment that then drives that set of credentials is absolutely possible. I mean, at Century, we do this, right? And we do it with institutions because we have this amazing tool of formative assessment, and you can do summative assessment. There are advantages to both. But then what happens is it takes away the high stakes nature of it. So if you had that, it'd be really interesting. Now, schools are doing this, and I'll tell you how they're doing it. They've been put in this position. And there are many schools out there, not just 1 or 2 pioneers, many that, for example, have come to us and said, right, we use Century. Can we use the quantitative data that is built in this system, since students have been using it since the beginning of the year or even last year? And can we have a quantitative measure to rely on when our teachers predict grades? So there's an element of fairness. Now, what that means is that you take the quantitative data and then you couple it with qualitative feedback from teachers, because it is really important teachers get to give that feedback. And what I like about this is actually this is the bit that's been missing from, you know, most GCSEs and other sorts of grades, right? Is the ability for the teacher to come in saying, actually, I do know this child. I think that's really important. And as you said, it is about trusting our teachers. And frankly, if we don't, then why on earth are we all sending our kids to them all day, every day? You know, if they're not childcare, so they are teachers. We should trust them. They're professionals. It's hard to become a teacher. They should be able to give that qualitative feedback. So that passport then starts to develop. A student, look at it from a student perspective. You've now got this technology that's provided you with this really, you know, rich picture of everything that you've achieved. You can add to it, but it's that idea of evolving. So, you know, talking about evolution and revolution, it's actually, they can evolve those skills. So if you're a student, you didn't do particularly well in an area that maybe, you know, one of these apprenticeship training providers who, you know, you're really keen on, they value that skill, you can go back. You can go back and improve it. You're not lumbered with one level or one grade after one high stakes exam during a particularly bad day in your life, where, you know, the rest of your opportunity in life, you feel, frankly, has just been completely smashed because of that one exam. So what's so interesting is that schools themselves, we didn't come up, you know, we've got this technology, they use it. They came to us and said, can we use it in this way? I said, of course you can. And we've built part of our system for those schools that have asked in this way. So they're going to now have a situation where come the summer, they are able to give their students a grade. We have more than half the colleges in the country. They're going to be able to look at, for particularly maths, English, functional skills, look at that data. And data is important. The standards of the content and the questions are, of course, important. That's where the challenge comes in into how you'd implement this across the globe potentially. But we know that it's the same sort of standard because schools use it, colleges, enough of them use it to be able to see that, and where it's all been developed is, you know, we haven't produced content and questions from a Twitter feed asking people to just submit videos. This has all been done by permanent high quality teaching staff. And you can start to see how they're now going to be able to provide that to their parents. So a parent walks in and says, why has my child been given this grade? Right? Student walks in, young adult into college. Why have you given me this? The teacher can present them something that is pretty objective, as well as, and here is my area of expertise. So that balances out what you were just talking about, which is that trust. And actually, but fundamentally, I have to, sort of agree, I think, with what you were intimating in the question, which is it's actually diabolical, the situation that we've put them in. We get so much out of teachers. And it's kind of crazy that, we're in a society where we don't trust them. And when I speak to some of our partners in Canada, when I speak to some of our partners in Australia, in Estonia, the way in which they talk about their teachers, I really envy them. So this is entirely possible in the United Kingdom. And we can achieve this trust, and we can use technology in the way it can be used effectively to augment all of this. It's not going to do it on its own. But I think that we can get there. It's just going to take some really brave people to say that we can.
Couldn't agree more. I think brave people is what it takes. And I suppose it's nice to hear people that are working alongside educationalists who are championing teachers, championing educators. And I know that the work that you and the team at Century are doing is having a massive impact in lots and lots of places. I wonder, for those people who don't know what you do at Century, whether it'd be worth you just giving us a little bit of an insight into why you think technology should augment education and what you're doing at Century for that.
Yeah, sure. So look, we didn't develop Century because we thought, let's build an edtech company. We just so I was on a government advisory board. I was very fortunate. I was running a different company, Masada, that was just doing completely different things, and it was very social impact focused. So we were selling sauces and then providing hot meals to the homeless, vaccines to some people in Africa, to kids in Africa, and building schools. And I learned that 20% of our nation didn't have the required levels of literacy and numeracy to get a really great job at the end of school. And I thought, well, what's the point of funding schools in Commonwealth countries that are all replicating our model if we can't get it right here? And so just out of curiosity, and I had taught for a couple of years prior to this. So I had to do so much learning science that I just thought, I wonder what's actually happening. So I went into schools, and I went into some of the most challenged schools in the country and some of the most well-performing, if you like. And I went to colleges, and I happened to be an advisor for a group of colleges at the time. So access was relatively easy. On the front line, I could see that we still deliver that one-size-fits-all. So when we were talking earlier about that point about some institutions not moving forward after the pandemic, the ones that are just simply doing one-size-fits-all on Microsoft Teams or Zoom or Google Hangouts, or Google Meets, that one size fits all, we know, is inadequate. It doesn't provide students with what they need. It doesn't differentiate for them. It doesn't provide them with interventions at the time, and it's a really old process. But when you've got so many students in front of you in a classroom, whether they're learning maths or English or whether they're learning law and accountancy at university, it doesn't matter. The point is we need to differentiate for them. They deserve a personalised education. At the same time, we thought, well, then, okay, how do we do this? There's no magic wand being waved, and we've not got a million new teachers joining the profession. So let's look at teachers, let's ask them. And they said, but I'm already drowning in my work. And then it became really, it was just really stark sort of data that, 74% at the time when I looked at this wanted to quit their jobs in the next 3 years. That's now 82%. And I'm sure the pandemic, as much as everyone's been powering through, it's been exhausting for them, absolutely exhausting. So I looked at all of this and thought, well, teachers are struggling with workload, marking, planning, marking 30 tests if you're in FE 70 potentially, trying to then be a data analyst and figure out the point of need. So we went away and thought, well, what could we do about this? And it was interesting. There was more technology on our mobile phones, recommending movies and shopping and how to invest than there was in the school. They'd gone from a blackboard to an interactive whiteboard. And so we looked at the learning management system, which is where I think innovation went to die. It's simply just digitizing exactly what we do manually and offering homework back and forth. And I thought, well, that's not innovation and transformation. So what can we do? And then this idea of, well, why can't we, if we can personalize for films, and if we can personalize for how you shop, if we can personalize for how you save and how you invest, why can't we personalize how you learn? And it was this idea about how to combine all of the neuroscience research that's been done by academics around the world on memory, like looking at short-term to long-term memory, on focus, on effort levels, on emotions, on preferences, on, skills. How do you actually transform knowledge into skills so it can be applied, right? Because that's often what we want to see when we think about learning and education. And it turns out that if we could build a machine that learns how the three of you learn, then when the three of you are learning whatever the subject is, right, whether it's CPD for teachers or, maths at primary school, it will figure out exactly like what you know and what you don't know, which is fine, but it will identify why you're struggling. Most systems will, come up with a flag if you're struggling, but you still require the teacher to do a lot of work. Imagine something that knows you're struggling in physics because you can't calculate equations in maths. Now, a system that uses varying forms of artificial intelligence can do this. And so the idea was to combine neuroscience, learning science, and AI. And it took years to build and several £1 million from very wonderful philanthropic investors and a lot of patience on their part. But this is now being used in schools, colleges, and universities across the board. As I said, whether it's maths or whether it's English or whether it's law or whether it's health and social care. And so that was essentially the idea. So now students are getting that differentiated, personalised education. It's being picked up straight away when they don't understand something. The teacher knows why they don't understand something. The machine will make an intervention itself. The teacher then can also make an intervention. So what you've done is you have superpowered your teachers. They're no longer exhausted marking and assessing. They get all the information at the touch of a button and they do their job. And when you talked about Lord Jim Knight and how he was talking about let teachers do what they signed up to do, that's what we're now seeing. They're saying, I came in to make a difference to young people. I came in to make those positive interventions so that they can achieve more and increase outcomes. And you're able to do it after the touch of a button rather than spend hours and hours marking, work, piece of work after piece of work on a Sunday night and then having to plan your lesson because technology can do it for you. So that's simply all it is. And it just augments the teaching and learning process.
That idea that it's going to give teachers the kind of the human side back is one of the most promising things about artificial intelligence and the ed tech of the next few years. Is if it works well, I think that potential is huge. And I don't know if you want to get into. We were listening to your talk with Corbis yesterday, and the kind of the soft skills that are going to be needed in the future. And I know we're talking here about what we're preparing our students for, but actually it's also, are we going to have to do some prep for our teachers as well? Is what a teacher is gonna change, and are we going to have to prime them for that, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're actually seeing, because this isn't the future of education. I know this is Edufuturists, which is amazing. This is Edu now. And what's so futuristic about it is that question we answered earlier, which is, well, can we then get this to everyone? How are we going to get to everyone? But on the skills, what was really interesting was that there is a bit of a split. We've seen, because we have a really good relationship with lots of our colleges, our schools, universities, and learning providers, and there are a certain portion of them that will say, look, now I can focus on teaching these skills, embedding these other skills into our lessons. And they're focused on those soft skills. They're focused on, how can we spend a bit more time actually being a bit more creative, problem solving, leadership, collaboration, all of those sorts of things. I mentioned in the Cobus talk, and I've mentioned at, DigiFest, the idea of, it's actually from the Centre of Real World Learning, the engineering habits of mind, learning habits of mind. So they've said, we now have time to do this. It frees up time. And that time is, so valuable, as we know, and particularly in the school or college or university day. And that's great. Some educational institutions haven't said that. And that's because they're often firefighting. They're often, they've just got such a range of students in front of them. They're just simply doing the most basic thing, which is actually, I'm just going to focus on trying to get them to get better outcomes in this particular test, in functional skills or in, English speaking and, grammar, for example. That's what they're doing. So it's really interesting. And when you see that, you see both ends of the spectrum. You see, where the opportunity lies in terms of actually you can then go on to do all these really important things. We talk about soft skills. I always say, look, they're core skills, because every time we call them soft, it just feels like they're less important, but they're so important. But then you've got that side where, you see the firefighting and you see how difficult it is. And this again comes down to how I think a lot of the world doesn't quite appreciate how challenging things have been, and particularly in the colleges sector, right? In further education, we've been into these places, and I'm telling you, you've got 70 students, in the room. Some of them, particularly if you think about resets, it's a really interesting, really interesting to look, particularly at, for example, English resets. So you have some that just missed, the old C, right? The old sort of C grade, and they were on levels now. And then you've got some who missed completely. And, one or two teachers, 70 individuals in front of them, and you've got to deal with that incredible diverse range of knowledge and skills in 1 year, or two. It's really interesting. And so when you look at that, you start to understand how difficult it is. And so, yeah, we talk a little bit about the technology, and we can see the future in terms of the time it allows teachers. And one, I think the most important point here, right, is that when you look at those skills and those engineering habits of mind, and if any of your listeners don't know what I'm talking about, there's an amazing report they can download. I think it's really good. It's called Learning to Learn, and it's by the All-Party Parliamentary Group on AI, and you can just download it. It's got the Centre for Real World Learning's diagram on learning habits and engineering habits of mind. It's also got the soft skills and hard skills that you just referred to. You are providing educators time to teach those skills. There is not much technology that can teach those skills themselves. And by the way, just in case in the background you can hear my two very noisy children, I can only apologise, but they have had their dinner and so they're fully energised. But, on that sort of going back to the skills, I think, it's not as though we're saying AI can teach these things. And I think there are some in the education sector say, but then why can't they? I said, well, then now you're trying to replace teachers, aren't you? And actually, it's not good enough. It's not good enough to do that. And so use technology for what it's great for. Save yourselves lots of time. Differentiate and personalise for students. Tick, tick, tick. But when it comes to some of these skills, allow yourself the breathing space to actually build those into your lessons and teach them yourself. And that is the power of this sort of technology.
Yeah, I think one of the we were talking about this yesterday. We did an event for the AP Connect, and we talked about adult education and the use of technology in that, and how one of the biggest learnings is around asynchronous. How adults around their busy schedules, resets of the GCSE. I think the stat from 2019 from the AOC was those students who don't achieve a magic 4 at the age of 16, only 19% will ever go on and do that. You've got all of the different things of maybe potentially ESOL learners first time they're sitting the GCSE, those people who've tried it 5 times, those people who've come straight from work, juggling all those things. That technology, whether it be Sentry Tech or anything else, can play a massive part in asynchronous learning where they can learn at their own pace. And I think the pandemic has shown a path for that. And I think we follow that path. Adult education is really struggling. That they're not getting the numbers across the board in FE and beyond. And I think it's because we're not tailoring to that personalised learning experience. And also, a lot of the fractional staff don't have time to work with 50 students that are trying to juggle, provide timely feedback, appropriate feedback, as well as trying to really personalise the experience for such a diverse amount of people that might all be looking for the magic 4, as they call it, but have never had a GCSE or going from a 1 to a 4 or so many different things. And I think that's what we need to focus on, the personalised experience and the asynchronous element of learning, and how Sentry Tech or any technology can play a part in that to substitute, enable, support teaching and learning, so that the high-end students can pick it up, go on Sentry Tech or Hegarty or anything else, whereas the teacher can then support the students who are really struggling with some misconceptions or some of lack of understanding or just a fear of something, and really start to delve into that. And I think that's what we really need to push forward, that kind of idea.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I mean, if we think about, so, one of you said, and, you're focused on careers, right? And so if just imagine you and me both sitting down on an adult learning platform that's just like any of the other maths apps that you sort of see, or the learning apps that's, been programmed by a human. So it's as good as the human who programmed it. It's pretty rules based. We're going to follow the same pathway, right? It's going to be incredibly boring for you, and it's not going to engage you to go through that same CPD, that same kind of learning as me. I probably need to start from the beginning. I might have more issues than you, and levels of understanding, going to be different. Whereas you kind of want to more sort of maybe enhance or refine, your knowledge of that area. The same goes for artificial intelligence. So I can build, the architecture of, for example, our system, and sort of, sketch that out now. I can build a neural network. So imagine me and maybe one of you who hasn't got that skill set, again, doing the same course on the same system, right? It's incredibly boring for me. And I'll be sitting there thinking, but I know all of this, and I've even built one. So, right, so I know issues that can arise if you do it this, that, or the other way. And for you, it would be really potentially an interesting introduction, and you spend a lot more time. That legacy technology that people use, those learning platforms or learning management systems that are very one size fits all, they're rules based. They might take you on one or two different pathways, but they're not really actually learning how you learn. Your focus, your effort, your memory function, all of these different areas that we know really affect the learning experience. And it's not collecting any of that information to then give you that better experience. It's not engaging. If you have an adult who is busy, they may have a job, they're trying to make ends meet, and then they've got to come back and learn on a technology program that is providing them with that, really that experience that isn't engaging. You can just imagine how hard it would be for you and me. So why would it be any different for them? So providing them, as you say, with that technology that can respond, that can adapt, that can give them what they actually need to solve that problem that they need to solve in that moment of time is really, really important. And that is what personalized technology that uses true AI is about. And when I say true AI, it's a really important point, because the Financial Times published a report not so long ago where 40% of companies that say that they use AI actually are using it as a marketing term. They don't use artificial intelligence. The way to think about AI and artificial intelligence is that it's not the same as human intelligence. So if you have a machine that has been built by humans, and they have programmed it, even in a maybe slightly complex way, but they have programmed it, that's a human intelligent machine. If you have a machine that is programmed by humans, but then it starts to learn by itself, right? So it starts to spot significant patterns and correlations in how people behave across the globe, right? In terms of how you're learning, how you're performing, how often when a teacher intervenes, the grades actually go up. Does that mean teacher intervention is actually really crucial? A machine that can tell whether content is of the same standard or not, how a student who is from the north of England, who's marked as pupil premium, who's dyslexic, might actually behave on a certain piece of material compared to someone from the south of England who's autistic. That sort of level, imagine that level of detail and that level of understanding, and it's constantly learning and evolving. That's how Google search became so clever. When we used to type and search, we might have to look at page 2, 3, or up to 10 to find what we're looking for. Now it comes up at the top because it is constantly learning from people typing, how much they're typing, how long they're typing for, where you hover your mouse, not even just where you click your mouse. That same sort of technology used in education is really powerful. And that is the point that I'm trying to make, that this AI technology, true AI, is where the difference is made. And that's why it takes millions of pounds to build it. It is not about content. Content in the education side of things is equally as important. It has to be done in a quality way, but it's about marrying that quality content with quality technology. And once you've got the two of those together, that is what can truly create impact and augment teaching and learning, because otherwise you are providing people with a suboptimal system, and with a suboptimal system you get suboptimal results.
Wow, what a powerful way to finish. What a great conversation. Ended on a high. It did start on a high as well, and I think it carried on all the way through. If you're a futurist, you'll love listening to this and you'll love reading the book. If you're a if you're a trad, you'll probably hate it, but that's fine too, because that's what
That's
your network
okay.
target audience. And so AI, the future of technology, personalized learning, so much in there. Priya Lakhani, so thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I loved speaking to all three of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Priya.
Thanks, Priya.
Thank you.